In the center of the planet, there sleeps the great Earth Dragon, a being of incomprehensible might. So immense is his power that even his dreams change the world, granting special individuals on the surface extraordinary powers beyond those of mortal men. This is the Earth of the Mirage universe, and you're listening to the Mirage Barrage. Ethan's bright green exosuit flew across the surface of the slanted spacecraft. The cruel, grinning face of the Gargoyle was staring up at him, seeming to dare him on despite his frozen face being incapable of changing expression. Ethan accelerated down towards the grayish robot, waiting for him to twitch, to try to dodge aside like a bullfighter. That's exactly what the Gargoyle was thinking of doing. A split second before Ethan was to slam into him at high speed, the Gargoyle spread his wings, flared his engines, and with a single mighty beat of the bat-like appendages, flew upwards. As soon as he did, Ethan slammed his foot into the hull of the ethereal hawk. The springy metal strip that extended beyond his toes made contact. It bent as designed, and a moment later snapped back, adding to the force of the kick. Ethan shot upwards mere feet before he had reached the Gargoyle. The powerful engines of the Gargoyle's suit would have easily outpaced any leap, powerful as it may have been, from Ethan's exoskeleton. In time. But the Gargoyle's playing chicken worked against him. Even with the powerful beat of his wings to get him started, the engines couldn't rocket him to his full speed in an instant. Ethan leapt up, just short of plowing into the Gargoyle's chest. Instead, he had to settle for wrapping his arms around the legs of the robot. The Gargoyle's sudden upward motion was derailed by Ethan's forward momentum. The two spun around end over end as the Gargoyle tried to lean over and swipe at Ethan's back, only to be violently whipped to one side and then the other. His desperate attempt to stabilize the two of them with his wings only made them spin more erratically. Because Ethan was doing his best to make things worse. He wouldn't let go of the Gargoyle's legs, twisted back and forth and even boosting with his powerful single engine here and there to throw him further off course. Because Ethan was confident his newly enhanced suit could take the incoming damage far better than the more spindly and ornate Gargoyle. And all at once, his guess was put to the test. The two slammed back down into the hull, the Gargoyle's right wing bending back on itself as his head snapped back and Ethan's exosuit fell on top of him. The two slid down the hull, the Gargoyle's head pointing towards the sandy beach below. His eyes flickered for a moment, but if he was dazed, it didn't impede him for long. The Gargoyle felt Ethan's grip loosen with the sudden impact and kicked out with startling force. Ethan was suddenly flung into the air. He was more shocked that the Gargoyle had enough strength to send him flying than he had been from the impact with the hull, but he didn't let it shake him for long. He activated his engine, aimed, and slammed right back down into the Gargoyle. The Gargoyle was quick, trying to push off with his bent wing, hoping to roll out of the way. He reacted as fast as he could be expected to, but it was still too late. There just wasn't anything he could do. The green armor slammed back into the Gargoyle, whose armor creaked and groaned under the pressure. His eyes flickered more frantically, like sparking light bulbs burning themselves out. Ethan raised his hand and began slamming it into the grinning face. The weakness had sunk to a lurking beast in the back of his mind. It consumed him and lunged with unyielding hunger, which wasn't satiated, but rather exacerbated by every sign of damage and weakness the unchanging metal face betrayed. But once again, while the Gargoyle appeared weak, his focus was hardly shattered. Even as Ethan was consumed by his human weaknesses, the Gargoyle was displaying none. He heaved Ethan up and over his head in a judo-like move, assisted by the angle of the ship. Ethan had only been relying on his weight to keep the Gargoyle pinned. In his frenzy, he had neglected a solid grip and was tossed up and over the Gargoyle. As he tumbled, the Gargoyle twisted himself around and to his feet. He watched as Ethan's exosuit tumbled end over end down the ship and spread his wings once more. Ethan swung himself around, trying to dig his fingers into the metal hull to pull himself to a stop. The thick plating didn't yield easily, nor did it offer much purchase. Ethan flared his engine again, and this proved far more effective. He slowed to a stop almost immediately, awkwardly perched at the angle of the craft. He had no real purchase, he was just relying on a little bit of friction and his engine to keep him still. The Gargoyle laughed. His eyes were glowing steadily again. His armor was cracked in places and heaving as if some monster inside was breathing heavily, just waiting to burst from the metal egg of the Gargoyle's exoskeleton. "You're a tenacious one," he said, some strain leaking into his otherwise taunting voice. "Have we met recently?" "Yeah," Ethan replied. "Pretty recently. You killed my family." "Is that so?" the Gargoyle asked. The casual incredulity of his question enraged Ethan, and his engine burst to life, revving up to full power. He shot up towards the Gargoyle, readying the nozzles on his arm tanks to lance out with liquid jets. The gargoyle was even faster this time, but he didn't try to dodge. His wings sprang out and sliced down like the front legs of a praying mantis. The sharpened tips struck just inside of Ethan's shoulder armor. The wings were startlingly strong, holding Ethan back for a second. Even so, the sheer power of Ethan's engine would have overpowered their strength, if the gargoyle hadn't released the claws on his feet. Instead, by doing this, the gargoyle allowed himself to be pushed back upward, using his wings to keep him arm's length away from Ethan. Ethan reached out and activated the water jets. The gargoyle twitched in surprise as they started to cut into his armor. The water jets started to carve into the hardened metal, but it must have been some alien metal as well, because progress was slow. The gargoyle made his move. He twisted around, closing unexpectedly and slashing at the green exosuit. Several short blades sprang up from his forearms and cut at the suit. He swung around as Ethan tried to grasp at him, ducking under his arms. He shot back up and slashed again at the large tanks at Ethan's waist and left arm. While his blades had barely scratched Ethan's armor, their rapidly vibrating edges found purchase on the tanks and ripped them open. Water spilled out as the gargoyle swung around behind him. Ethan grinned maliciously. He adjusted the fluid modulators and prevented the rest of the water from leaking out, sloshing it around within the tanks. But that wasn't the best part. "Mistake," he told the gargoyle, and then swung his fist as he adjusted the fluid modulators again. With his tanks half emptied, there was plenty of room for the water to slosh around, and with that freedom came power. Ethan sloshed the water around, forcing it to one side as he swung, amplifying the power of his attack. The gargoyle's attack, aimed for Ethan's single engine, merely scraped at his armor as Ethan spun around and smashed his arm into the gargoyle's chest. The multifaceted armor compressed and spread as Ethan's arm slammed into him, pushing him aside with sudden force. If the gargoyle had breath, he would have lost it from the massive blow. As it was, he was merely startled as he was slapped aside, knocked into the hull of the ship, and bounced off it. His engines flared back to life after a quick spin midair, and he stabilized himself, wings spread. For a second, it looked like he was just going to hang there, taunting Ethan. But then, half a dozen thin white missiles fired from the almost imperceptible launchers at his waist. Ethan lunged to the side, his leap further powered by an intentional sloshing of the water and the fluid modulators throughout the suit. The missiles should have missed, but despite their diminutive size, they were sophisticated enough to track the green exosuit and redirect themselves right at him. They popped loudly around the suit, sending rippling shockwaves across the armor. Ethan shook inside the armor but knew the thick plating would hold. When he regained his senses, he saw another 6 missiles coming straight for him. He made a half-hearted dodge but already knew it was too late. He braced for another series of minor explosions, but they never came. He didn't even feel the impacts. They were much too light. The first thing he noticed after realizing that too much time had passed without a bang was the sudden heat. Ethan uncrossed his arms from over his head and looked down. 3 of the missiles had managed to lodge themselves in his armor, the other 3 having been deflected. But the real noteworthy thing was the stream of orange flaring sparks pouring from the missile shells. Thermite, burning through his armor. Ethan immediately scraped the missiles from his armor as he dashed sideways and revved up the engine. More missiles were already in the air, even as the exosuit took flight. He took the hits as he activated his water jets. He looped the high-velocity, high-pressure liquid back around and into the secondary nozzle on each arm. These water saws shot out several feet, and as Ethan turned towards the gargoyle, they reached out towards the wide canvas of the bat-like wings. But all of a sudden, they weren't there. The gargoyle retracted them in a split second, diving, then spreading them again as his engines flared to life. He was fast, insanely fast. He angled his wings sharply one way and then another, zipping around Ethan, who could barely keep up. He slashed at the gargoyle, who took a few hits, but the gargoyle was so fast, the hits so brief, that the water saws couldn't make any serious progress. And then the gargoyle struck. He didn't strike for impact, for damage, not directly at least. He snagged Ethan's leg, twisted it up and around, spinning Ethan upside down. As Ethan tried to spin midair, trying to slash at the gargoyle, he was released just as quickly as he had been nabbed. Ethan reoriented himself as the gargoyle flew in a tight loop, grabbed Ethan's arm and twisted him around. Ethan spun violently, and then the gargoyle retreated and struck again, flipping him over and over on yet another axis. His head began to swim, the disorientation, the dizziness overwhelming him. The gargoyle spun him yet again, and Ethan tried to flare his engine to stabilize himself. Before he could get a grip on the situation, he was slammed back into the hull of the ethereal hawk. His head snapped around, and he felt reality slip into a hazy mirage. His nauseating vertigo was temporarily sidelined for the aching daze that overwhelmed him. He was only vaguely aware of the gargoyle grabbing his leg, whipping him around, and tossing him down into the sandy beach. The impact rattled him yet again. The gargoyle slammed Ethan's limbs into the sand and then perched himself on the chest of the exosuit. The gargoyle flapped his wings, lifting himself up, and then slammed himself back down brutally on Ethan's chest. The armor held, but Ethan felt a pain in his chest from the blows. Then he felt heat. The gargoyle had dropped more of the thermite-pouring missiles onto him. He was going all out to destroy Ethan completely. Ethan was dazed, disoriented, but he had to fight back. He summoned up his concentration, pulled his arm from the sand, and took his best guess, his best aim, for the gargoyle's face. Contact. He grabbed onto the misshapen metal mug and fired up the water jets again. The gargoyle hissed or shrieked in shock, maybe even agony, but he didn't recoil. He tried to strike at Ethan's arm, trying to push it aside. Ethan wouldn't let him. He gripped tighter and kept firing with the intense water jets. The gargoyle twisted his arms and wings under Ethan's outstretched arm and pushed. It didn't work. His arms grabbed Ethan's and tried to wrench it aside. That didn't work either. The gargoyle lashed out with his wings sharply, forcefully, pushing and slashing violently at Ethan's suit. The burst of motion was finally enough to launch Ethan away from him. Ethan stumbled. He immediately tried to fire up the water saws again, even through the daze. For a second, he was confused why his left saw didn't appear. Then he realized that in his haze, he couldn't keep the fluid modulator circulating the water within that tank. He was completely out on that side. He dismissed the concern and refocused on his remaining active saw. He prepared for an attack, but in the second that he was distracted, the gargoyle had circled around. He looped around behind Ethan and then charged from the direction of the sea. Ethan couldn't spin in time. The gargoyle slammed into him, picking him off his feet and charging towards the base of the ethereal hawk. Ethan was twisting around, readying to slash with the water saw before the impact, but the gargoyle flipped around on his back, spinning them both, and then released Ethan. Ethan's suit flew forward and slammed into the base of the starship, the water saw dissolving into a spray of unassociated droplets. The gargoyle spread his wings like a giant parachute and redirected his engines to slow himself before he could collide into the hull as well. Those seconds of slowing himself after releasing Ethan were critical. Ethan was a little quicker to recover now. He flipped over with the help of the sloshing internal liquid and readied for a more conventional strike. A devastating punch to hopefully knock the gargoyle down and regain the initiative in the fight. But he didn't get the chance. Suddenly, a blinding flash washed over Ethan. Seemingly hundreds of warnings popped up inside his helmet as the sensors overloaded and he was launched back into the hull. This time, it wasn't Ethan's flesh that was betraying him, it was the suit. It took several seconds in which Ethan was painfully open, exposed, defenseless, before the suit recovered. When his vision finally returned, the gargoyle was nowhere to be seen. He looked side to side, desperately scanning for his enemy, but he was completely absent. The beach was completely abandoned. He glanced down towards his suit and was astonished. A lot of the surface coating of the armor was warped and weathered, and then he noticed that the hull behind him was similarly warped and weakened. Finally, it clicked what had happened. The gargoyle had used his dimension warping capability, disappearing and catching Ethan and the hull of the ship in the resulting wave. Ethan felt stupid for having taken so long to put the obvious pieces together. He was still a little dazed and dizzy from the gargoyle's unorthodox attack before. "Ethan, are you there?" Kelly Carpenter asked over the radio. "Hanging in there," he replied. "I think the gargoyle took off." "We detected a burst of energy. I'm guessing that was him?" "Yeah, caught me in the wake. But I'm doing alright. Think he's gone now." "You hit him good, I take it." "Got him in the face pretty nastily before. I think that..." In a sudden flash, a grayish shape reappeared a few feet from Ethan and slammed into him. The two mechanical forms burst through the hull of the ethereal hawk and tumbled up the hallway. The gargoyle's forearm blades sprang back out and he slashed at Ethan's tanks. Ethan just barely pulled them out of his way as the gargoyle continued a relentless assault. Ethan recovered just enough to avoid being torn apart. In the cramped hallway, the gargoyle's wings and the heavily armored exosuit were difficult to maneuver. They took wild swings at each other, grappling and disengaging before falling right back into the pattern. The gargoyle was quicker, a little more nimble, but he just couldn't summon up the power to break through Ethan's heavy armor. He struck again and again, but Ethan would recover and strike back. He caught one of the gargoyle's wild strikes and slammed his empty tank into the side of the forearm blades, breaking most of them off. The hallway was shot to bits as the last few missiles from the gargoyle flew wildly, far too close to lock onto the correct target. The lights flickered, hatches were ripped open, and the floor was shredded in the intense melee. It lasted minutes, and none of it was clear or decisive. It was ugly, messy, and it ended abruptly. Suddenly, another flash engulfed the two fighters. and they vanished from the dimension. Ethan woke up to pain over his entire body. It hurt to even think about moving. It took a moment for him to even realize that an alarm was droning in his ear. For a moment, he wondered where all of the visual alerts and errors were. Then he realized that there had been so many that they had automatically minimized into groups, awaiting him to look over the literally hundreds that were there. As he silenced the alarms, he finally glanced around to see where he had ended up. He was looking up at a rising brick building, probably a large apartment complex. There was a large dent in the wall directly above him, and he felt fairly certain that many of the alarms he had silenced had gone off because he had made the dent. It looked like he had fallen through the air before the impact and then simply dropped into this alleyway. He was, apparently, back in the city, everything looking refreshingly normal. No strange glowing corridors or crooked spaceships, just a dirty alleyway with a busted exosuit. Ethan slowly stood up and was thankful to see that he had full mobility. While the suit was pretty banged up, the internal systems were still functioning. He had lost much of his water reserves and fluid modulators, but the suit was already regenerating the latter, and he had sealed any passageways to the shattered tanks. Still, he would need some repairs. The dimension warping had been particularly damaging to the outer layers of the armor. In fact, the protective glass over his helmet had warped a bit and made it difficult to see properly. He popped it open, and it swung up and back, freeing him to look around unobstructed. Now he just had to figure out what to do. He suddenly realized how much he had lost in the warp back here. The Ansible node was back in Slant City, as were the only people who could repair his armor. An idea suddenly occurred to him. He flipped up the event logs and accessed the temporal tug subsystem. If he could just rewind the suit's timeline, he might be able to pull himself back to the other dimension. Of course, that would depend on just how the temporal tug worked, and if it hadn't been too long. Ethan had lain unconscious for 12 minutes, and the temporal tug only worked over a matter of seconds. It was far too late. Ethan stood there in the alley and suddenly realized how hot and stuffy the armor had become. He reached up and pulled off the helmet awkwardly. All at once, the exosuit seemed clunky and burdensome. He felt a chilly breeze on his face, his hair plastered against his forehead with sweat. He had no idea where to go now. He carefully sorted through his priorities as he stood there, the sounds of the city seeping into the alley. He needed to get back to Slant City. He needed that Ansible node and repairs to the suit. Actually, now that he thought about it, he also needed a way to warp between dimensions even after he got back to the angled spacecraft. All of these goals meant one thing: Simulator. Simulator had the technology to warp between worlds, and he needed that, although breaking in would be tricky, especially with the suit. He couldn't exactly sneak around with this thing on, and if he wasn't going to be wearing this, he would need other equipment, other computers to hack back into the place. That narrowed things down nicely. Ethan set off, but not before a quick detour to drop off his green exosuit. Jason Malkowski waved at his last employee to leave. A moment later, and the door closed with a chime, leaving Jason alone to finish closing up the shop. He thought back to the many annoyances that he had been forced to deal with, not least of which was the aftermath of the little break-in that... Ethan Swanson tapped a few numbers into the security pad and stepped in casually. "You!" Jason said angrily. "Hello, you," Ethan replied. "Hey, listen, I need some more stuff. Didn't you get enough last time? Wait, why am I asking? I'm calling the cops." "Whoa, don't do that. I need your help." "Why in the world would I help you?" "Because we were a great team last time." "What? You broke in and stole a bunch of stuff from me." "Okay, a bunch? I took like one laptop and some dongles. That's not a bunch, that's like a few at worst." "A thief is still a thief. I'm calling the cops." Ethan stepped forward and leaned over the desk. "Look, you figured out that thing about the signals in the native dimension, and that led me to Simulator." Jason stopped halfway through dialing. "Simulator?" he asked. "What about Simulator?" "The strange signals were coming from Simulator, so I broke in. They've got a bunch of these corridors, a whole interdimensional travel system down there. They have these agents who go to these different dimensions and go on missions, and then Simulator records what they do and reconstructs it for their arcades." Jason slammed down the phone. "I knew it!" he declared. Ethan blinked. "You did?" "Well, not about the whole interdimensional agents thing, but I knew something was off about that company." Oh, okay, Ethan said, because I was going to say that was one crazy lucky guess. Do you have any proof? Footage? Jason asked eagerly. No, but if you can loan me some equipment, I can... Nope, Jason interrupted. Oh, come on, we could blow the lid off of this thing. Sure we could, once you give me a credit card number. I don't have a credit card number, Ethan said, annoyed, because some gargoyle thing wiped out all of my data. I could probably give you some specs for a dark matter receiver that I created. What in the world would I do with that? Jason asked. I mean, I sold it, so you probably could too. If you sold it, then some other multi-billion-dollar corporation owns the rights, so I couldn't do anything with that, could I? Well, I mean, if you want to get technical about it. Try again. I don't have anything else, not since that gargoyle blew up my house and killed my family. Ethan pounded his fist against the desk and Jason carefully stepped back. This gargoyle, he was from another dimension too? Jason asked, trying to mask his renewed skepticism. Yeah, I think so. That's who I was trying to track down on the Ansible node, and that's how I was led to Simulator, Ethan explained. Look, you saw the data last time. What do you think this is? Some elaborate prank? No, but anything is possible in this world, Jason said cautiously. I'm not lying about the dimension thing, Ethan said, grasping at any way to prove it now. Look, I stole something from Simulator. You can go find it and see. It's just over. The door chimed again. Ethan glanced over from his shoulder and saw the two suited men he had followed in the Simulator arcade. The two men who he had internally named left and right based on where they had been standing. Jason seemed to have noticed their Simulator Inc. badges as well and stiffened as they entered the shop. I really do need a new security system, he muttered. Forget that. Listen, Ethan said, and he leaned in closer and whispered rapidly. Left and right stepped up to the counter and each placed a hand on one of Ethan's shoulders. Excuse me, Left said, but we would like a word with your customer here. What business is it of yours? Jason asked defiantly. If you're going to cause trouble, I'll call the cops. Go ahead, Right said. We have security footage of this gentleman breaking into one of our buildings. We can press charges, of course, but I think it would be best for everyone involved to work this out informally. Less hassle for everyone. Unless you have some sort of relationship with this man, Left inquired. Perhaps you know something that we don't. Ethan stared at Jason, begging non-verbally. No, Jason said hesitantly. I don't know anything about this man. Humph, Right grumbled. Very well. Then unless anyone here wants to make this difficult... Neither Ethan nor Jason made a move or a peep. Then we'll be off. And the two suits marched Ethan back out the door. We know you have our suit, Wright insisted yet again. Ethan was sat behind a table in a round, bluish room. A couple of monitors were mounted on either side of the room, towards the ceiling where it was darker. The lights weren't quite spotlights, but lit up the lower part of the room far more effectively than they did the top. Overall, Ethan felt like he was a guppy in an aquarium. Unfortunately for them, while Left and Right probably wanted to seem like sharks, Ethan simply wasn't seeing it. Look, I may not be up on the latest fashions, but I wouldn't be caught dead in one of those monkey suits you guys are wearing, Ethan replied casually. You know what we're talking about, Right shouted at him. Left pulled him back a little and then put in, You didn't shut down the cameras when you hacked in. He clicked a button on a remote. Sure enough, one of the monitors lit up, showing footage of Ethan surreptitiously following the two suits through the arcade. Left clicked off the screen and turned back to Ethan. It doesn't take a genius to put together that you were the one to steal the prototype green exosuit, he added. Oh good, Ethan replied, mock-relieved. I was worried this would be too much for you guys to handle. So you admit it, Right pressed. Did I? Ethan said, rolling his eyes back and tapping his chin. It doesn't matter. The facts are indisputable, Left said calmly. Now, all that remains is figuring out what to do and finding the suit. Ethan shrugged. It's your suit. Surely you would know how to find it. Right grumbled. It would seem that someone went to some lengths to hide it, perhaps reprogramming or modifying it. I imagine that would be pretty difficult, Ethan said, grinning. Wonder what kind of brilliant madman could pull such a thing off. Do you also wonder how it was so easy for us to find you? Left asked. That took Ethan a little off guard. You're a wanted man, Left continued. Mr. Malkowski filed a police report and described you quite well. We weren't kidding back there that we have plenty to charge against you as well. We have an understanding with the federal government that allows us to keep some autonomy and do our work in peace. One part of our deal is that they help punish trespassers quite severely. What we're saying is that either you work with us or you're going to be put on trial for a federal offense, Wright said harshly. What could you possibly want with a mild-mannered citizen such as myself? Ethan asked, though a little of his casual attitude slipped away. The suit, Left stated again. Can't do it, Ethan replied just as sternly. Did you not understand what we just said? Wright asked, leaning in uncomfortably close. You'll be locked up unless you give us what we want. I'm not giving you the suit, Ethan insisted. That's a deal breaker. So prison it is then? Left asked. If you've got something else you can put on the table, I can make it work, Ethan said. He couldn't let himself go to prison, but if he gave up the suit, he would never be able to get back at the Gargoyle. Ever. Yeah, sure, kid, Wright laughed. Let's say you pay for the suit and we call it good. Do you have a few $1 million stashed around? Nope, Ethan replied simply. Then we're kind of stuck, aren't we? Wright asked harshly. Hold on, Left said carefully. Let's say you were capable of disassembling or reprogramming that suit. Okay, Ethan said. We know you hacked our systems. That's some impressive talent. Let's say we put that to use. You come work for us, pay off the suit that way. You've got to be kidding, Wright scoffed. Deal, Ethan replied immediately. Wright's jaw clenched and he slowly, painfully turned towards his partner. A word, please? He asked between clenched teeth. Sure thing, Left replied easily, and the two left the room. What are you thinking? Wright demanded. We need that suit, more than anything right now with our deficit of time tokens. I know, Left said reassuringly. I'm not expecting the board to be satisfied with just getting the kid to work for us, but if he's working here, we can keep an eye on him. When he does go for the suit, we will be right behind him. Oh, Wright said, then smiled, relaxing. Excellent idea. Shall we go give him the good news? Yeah, but try not to look so happy when we go back in, or else he'll know something's up. Right. How's this? Close, but when you're mad, you get this funny little crinkle between your eyebrows. I do not. There it is. Let's just get this over with, Wright huffed, and the two went back into the blue room. All right, kid, you have a deal, Wright said, seething. Sweet, but if I get an office, it better not be like this room. I get dizzy just sitting in here. You're not getting an office, Wright snapped. Ethan shrugged. Let's get the paperwork started. So, what's your name, kid? Left asked. It's Steven, Ethan replied, thinking quickly to the first name he could. Full name? Stevenson? Really? Wright asked incredulously. Yep, Ethan replied, grinning. I can't believe that's actually his name, Wright said, gaping at the official records, all of which were perfectly in order. Left shook his head, also not believing what he was seeing, but they both knew that the young man was an exceptional hacker. If these were forged, there would be no telling. For now, they just had to accept that their new employee was really called Steven Stevenson. Ethan was immediately put to work on improving security around the arcades. He thought for a moment that this was going to be a brilliant opportunity to get into Simulator HQ again and scope out how to use the corridors once more, but to his dismay, Chroma Computer, the sophisticated AI, was always watching over his shoulder. So far, it proved to be the only thing that he couldn't scheme his way past. Ethan also didn't miss the fact that Simulator was taking the opportunity to watch him closely. He knew that as soon as he was off work and headed to the apartment that they provided, that he was being watched constantly. As such, he didn't even try to return to the place he hid the suit. No, there was only one place he could go, and even then, it wasn't much of a sanctuary. Ethan stepped back into Jason's store just after closing. Jason watched him carefully as he approached the counter and leaned in conspiratorially. You found it? Ethan asked, barely a whisper. Yeah, incredible. What are you doing with it? Jason replied. I can't do anything right now, Ethan grimaced. I'm being watched. Well, I can't do anything with it, Jason replied. This is all way beyond me. The door chimed yet again. Both Ethan and Jason looked up, but it wasn't one of the suits from Simulator. No, while this man was wearing a suit, it was clearly more expensive and tailor-fitted, though he left it carelessly unbuttoned. The man had bright golden blonde hair combed back with far too much product, and piercing blue eyes that scanned the room from under thin eyebrows. His movements, though casual at first glance, belied a cleverness about him. Jason's jaw dropped. "Caldwell Sinclair!" he exclaimed. "Who?" Ethan asked, baffled. "Caldwell Sinclair, you dope," Jason said, aghast at Ethan's obliviousness. "Founder and CEO of Laudable Electronics." "Oh, right," Ethan said, this still clearly meaning nothing to him. "I'm flattered," Caldwell Sinclair said, and Ethan's blood ran cold. "If you don't mind, Mr. Malkowski, I actually came to speak with your associate here." "I know that voice," Ethan whispered. Barely containing the hate, he announced, "It's you! You're the Gargoyle!" "This is the Gargoyle?" Jason asked in astonishment. Sinclair ran his fingers through his hair and sighed. "Why does everyone I come across insist on naming it the Gargoyle? Why couldn't we for once come up with something original, like the... Okay, fine, it's a gargoyle." Ethan grabbed at a box cutter on the table. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Sinclair warned. "I've got nothing left to lose because of you," Ethan declared. Jason, on instinct, grabbed onto Ethan's shoulder, holding him back. "You might be surprised," Sinclair pressed on. "I have a proposal for you." "I don't care. I'm going to kill you," Ethan repeated. "You won't get the person you want to," Sinclair said enigmatically. "You won't kill me, but you'll kill an innocent bystander instead." "What are you talking about?" "The body you see before you is merely an agent, a vessel. My mind will live on even if you kill this body." "You mean you've kidnapped this body? You've kidnapped Caldwell Sinclair?" Jason asked in a mix of surprise and revulsion. "For years now, there's been little difference. But at one time I required a host, and this was a marvelous candidate," the Gargoyle or Sinclair or whatever he was said. "If I didn't take this action, I would be unable to walk amongst the people." "You're trying real hard to be unlikable," Ethan observed. "Oh no, how will I live with myself if Ethan Swanson is mad at me?" Sinclair mocked. "You know my name," Ethan said apprehensively. "I downloaded all your data, remember? It was actually quite impressive. The more I've delved into it, the more impressive I found it to be. To cut to the chase, I want to hire you." "Hire me? You're more insane than I thought. You're a complete psycho, and you killed my parents, my sister." "Did I?" What do you mean?" "Your family is alive, Ethan. I never had any intention of killing them." "I don't believe you." "Then calm down, turn on that brain, and I'll explain." You're letting your emotions control you again. Quite frankly, I had hoped you would have been able to rise above that, despite our previous encounters. Think for a moment. Think back to our last battle. When my suit warped between the dimensions, did the blast wave destroy everything within its radius? Ethan didn't answer. No, it didn't. Instead, you were warped here. Your family was much the same. Prove it. I will, if you hear my proposal. Forget it. I'm not working with a monster who kidnaps people, possesses bodies, and raids defenseless spacemen. Thrilling commentary. But I'm merely doing what I need to do. As laser-focused as you are on your family, I am just as focused on finding the solution to my own injury. Well, the difference is I'm helping others and you're just helping yourself, Ethan snapped. And now I'm offering to help you. So get off your high horse. You hardly put your genius to use improving the world. You were quite content to lounge around in self-indulgence before I came along. I dare say, based on everything that I know, that if you were in my position, you would have behaved exactly as I did. No, I wouldn't have. Let's prove it then. Let's say you had the ability to travel to other dimensions. Let's say that in those travels you stumbled upon a structure, a station, that existed in its own pocket universe, a dimension between dimensions, mysterious and abandoned. In the process of exploring this strange station with technology beyond your imagining, you stumbled into a trap. Your body was seized and trapped within a stasis chamber. but your mind was free. In fact, the strange technology of this dimension actually projected your consciousness into the world like a psychic field. You were able to seize control of one of the robots guarding the station by embedding your mind into it, but that robot body was pushed from the pocket dimension, forced to return to Earth. What would you do then? I wouldn't hurt other people. What would you do? I would use my brain. Remember that little piece of advice? Good. Now, what would you do if you realized that this suit your mind was trapped within could only move about for 10 hours before needing to recharge each and every day? What if you realized you could still project your consciousness into another human being while your mechanical body was at rest? I wouldn't. Oh, don't lie to me. What do you care if some millionaire scumbag had to loan you a body? These people ripped you off time and again. I've seen what they paid you. Who cares if he has to loan you a body so you can find your own? Why is it fair that he can go about doing whatever he wants while you are trapped in some dimension you can never find again? Ethan stumbled. He didn't want to admit it, but if he hadn't gone through all of this, that might have sounded like a tempting idea. He'd need the time to work on a solution. 10 hours a day was just too little. You would do anything it takes to find your body. The longer it took, the more desperate you would become. Your family was gone for 1 day and you already broke into the shop, broke into Simulator, stole their suit, and nearly killed their agents. How long until your line shifts just a little farther south? A year? 2 years? 5 years? Ethan didn't say a word. It would have just been a matter of time, wouldn't it? It's been a long time since I've seen my own face in the mirror, the gargoyle confessed. A deep pain crossed his face as he glanced in a reflective display. He wasn't repulsed by the alien face. He was sadly accustomed to it. Maybe I have been careless, even ruthless. I have been driven to this. If I am untethered, it is only because my mind has been set adrift while my body escapes me. If I have lost my humanity, it is only because I am no longer human. Such a sob story, Jason said. Those are still your choices. I don't ask for your pity, Sinclair shot back. Then he turned to the other in the room. I ask for your help, Ethan. I have seen the brilliance of your mind. Together, not only can we find your lost body, but we can find your family. Help me, and I will help you. You attacked Slant City, Ethan noted. I need resources in my search. They have some of the most advanced tech I've seen, and they weren't about to share, now were they? They need everything they can get. Then I'll make a donation. Name your price. You want to freelance as my conscience? Fine, let's do it. Because for all of the destruction my single-mindedness may have caused, I cannot shed it until I am whole again. You want to put a leash on me? To curb my excess? I don't care. I need you. And frankly, you need me. Who else do you have, Ethan? While I'm sure Jason here has been pleased as punch to see you again, I can't imagine many others are. I doubt Simulator is tripping over themselves to help you. I know they're watching you right now. If it weren't for my jammers, they'd be listening in on every word you said, waiting to pounce. I'd bet they'd drop you in an uninhabited dimension the moment you hand over that suit. And while I doubt they're hot on your heels, the government will hardly be your friend either. As for Slant City, well, you can't even reach them. Not without my help. I don't like you. I'm not asking you to. So I help you, and you don't hurt anyone else. You help find my family. I'll even help repair your suit. Ethan, this can't end well, Jason warned. If you would do anything to get your family back, Sinclair observed, then this should hardly be a difficult choice. Fine. I'll do it. Has Ethan found the only way to save his family, or is he setting himself up for a greater disaster to come? Will he really trust the depraved Gargoyle, or does he have a plan to deal with him? We can only wait and see. Until next time on the Mirage Barrage.